Hi guys and welcome back. Today I'm working on a digital piece, and this one I had a lot of fun figuring out where it was going to end up going as I was working on it. It has a lot of points where I work on it for a while going down a certain path, and then I backtrack and try to make it better from an earlier stage. And I just want to talk a little bit about the process for that one, but also the way that I can learn from that for other pieces as well. So usually when I work on a piece, not when I'm just sitting down sketching, but when I'm working for a piece, I get a little stalled out. A lot of times will put the cart before the horse a little bit, where I will not let myself draw until I have a concrete idea. And that is actually very counterintuitive because I won't get ideas until I start drawing and putting things together. I'll try to come up with an idea by just looking at reference, by thinking about things, by looking at more reference, and ultimately it just makes me stagnate because I am looking at all these disjointed ideas and trying to form an idea in my head without any sort of concrete way to see it in action or to start picking at it and adding things and changing it. So this wasn't always the way that I worked. I found that I'm getting a little bit more gun shy with actually putting the pen down on the paper or on the tablet, with whatever the case may be. And I'm not sure when that change really happened, at what point I felt like I needed to know the path before I started actually drawing. But I think it's just a little bit of a fear that it's not going to turn out. So if I have an idea before I start, I have a better chance of making sure it works out. And if I don't have an idea, a lot of times I will not be able to make it work. And in some ways it's good, I think, to be able to have a concept before I start drawing a little bit. But I think in the most part, it's really been holding me back from being able to really explore ideas. I really noticed the difference in the last piece that I worked on. I think it was for the YouTube Artist Collective, but I was doing the same thing where I was just staring at a screen trying to figure out what to draw without actually drawing for hours. And that was the point where I'm like, no, I can't do this anymore. I need to just take my sketchbook, take the ideas that I have already that I've looked at and I've gathered, and I need to go sit somewhere else and I need to just draw. I need to force myself to start drawing and getting an idea down. And even if it looks bad, it's okay because it's a process. And it felt so much better. The idea that I did end up coming up with just felt a lot more in line with me. It felt much better in that process than when I feel like I have to have an idea first. It can oftentimes feel a little bit foreign to me, or like it's not the direction I want to go in. But yeah, so that was actually really helpful, but also eye-opening to see that that is a process that I have a problem with, where I have been holding myself back from drawing. And basically that's why I was trying to not let myself get caught up on this one. So it is actually very simple subject matter. It's just a portrait, but I wanted it to have a little spark of something that makes it worth looking at, not just a portrait, not just something without any sort of sparks of interest. But when I started it, I had no idea where it was going to end up. I had no idea what this little detail was going to be or concept that was going to end up in this piece. And because I was working on something so simple and this little one-off thing, it actually worked really well in my favor as far as being able to make something that worked in the end. There's a lot of situations where it needs to fit a very specific thing, or I need to be able to make it work with more complicated things, so I can't get too far down the road before I know what it's going to end up being. So that isn't something that's always a good solution, but working on something simple like this and getting myself to work in a way that is much more work first, then figure it out, really helped, because I get most of my ideas while I'm working on a piece, while I've already started and realizing, oh, I can put this detail here and it'll make it really interesting, or it'll tie in with this. So I do get my best ideas after I've already started working on a piece, and this was no exception because I did start off with a very threadbare concept to start off with. I was able to add and add. It did end up being very convoluted. I did a lot of things where I needed to backtrack, or I thought it was going in the right direction and then I ended up reworking things out. But it was just a really freeing process to be able to let myself sit down and just work my way through it, work through the problems and the frustrations, because honestly, that was something that I dealt with this piece, feeling frustrated that it wasn't looking as interesting as I wanted it to, or that I had no ideas for it yet. So working with these negative feelings in a positive way, I guess, if that makes sense, being able to work past it is always beneficial, and it always helps me to get my mind around the fact that, yes, I can be frustrated in a piece. In fact, I usually am. And seeing the way that my process can work to help me get past that has been really beneficial and helpful. But as much as I think working more freely and working with this piece and figuring out as I was going along, I do think that I really overworked it. There are a few areas, well, specifically in the way that I had that contrasting color on top that was surrounded by all this other very saturated color. I think that there were points where I had a little bit more of an organic and more interesting and clean brushwork on top of it. And the more that I worked on it, I think that it kind of muddied it up a little bit. So there is absolutely a point where I can overwork something and let myself get too carried away with manipulating something or trying to figure it out. And I think that I did struggle with that a little bit on this one, where I just overworked it. I kept backtracking and thinking, okay, well, it's not good enough here, I need to add more here. But then I ended up going a little bit in circles. And while that was definitely can be and often is a negative for me to overwork something or to not be able to commit to something, I didn't really get my idea for what I wanted to make this piece special until several hours in of playing with the colors and manipulating that. And that's when I got the idea for this sort of a comet effect. I've had a few people look at it and see it as something different, like there's a spark coming out of his skin, of his face, or there's just a few different interpretations. But basically, that was a detail that I was really excited about, but I did not think of it until a ways into working with the colors and then playing with adding more of a golden light around his face. So while I do feel like I really overworked it at some points, I do know that getting it to the point that I was the most happy with it, I couldn't have gotten to that point if I had stopped working on it earlier. So I am glad that I kept pushing through it and pushing to the point that I was able to figure out how to make it work. And there were definitely some iterations while I was working on this piece where if I could have kept to the color treatment with this last detail, I think it would have been the best version of this. So I think that that's kind of a bittersweet thing about being able to re-watch my process, is that there are a lot of things that I would completely have forgotten that I did, so I would never have known that it was even an option. So being able to see it again and see what could have been is very helpful for the future, but it's also kind of sad to look at it and be like, oh, I could have had it be better if I had just stopped at that point, or if I had remembered that that's what it looked like. But it is very much a very good learning tool, being able to rewatch something like this, especially when it changed so drastically. But I had a lot of fun working with different layer modes. That's really how I got a lot of the effects for this one. And that was something that I really liked pushing farther than I normally do. Usually I use the layer modes to have different glowing effects specifically, but I also really played with this to be able to affect the color of the line work as well as the blocked in colors that I had below it. And I liked being able to work more as a cohesive full piece than getting stuck working on like one flatted shape at a time and slowly building it to a color palette that I liked. So being able to work with just an overarching colors on top of it, just really being able to work with everything grouped together from the line work to the shapes to the background, it really did actually help me to think through the colors a little bit better and get something that I like a lot more than had I worked in a more broken down fashion. So yeah, working with layer modes is a great way to be able to affect the entire piece and to be able to get these really interesting looks that a lot of times you don't think about until you're working on it and you're seeing how it affects it. So yeah, I love playing with layer modes. It is one of my favorite things to do, to be able to get a final outcome that is exactly what I wish it could be, but I don't always think about until I'm there. So it's a very helpful tool to be able to visualize the direction you want to go with. And I believe that the layer modes that I use the most, especially for like the blues, for the haze around the edges of the pages, I believe I used hard light and vivid light, or maybe it was linear light. I know that two of those work really well at coloring very dark colors like black. Specifically the hard light, where the line work was a really dark color, so being able to put the hard light with the blue on top of it, it made that black line work very blue, which was exactly what I'm looking for. Some of the color modes, specifically ones that deal with very lights like overlay or soft light, those can affect the lighter things, but oftentimes the darker colors remain unaffected by that. So that's why I really like to go in with the hard light, specifically when I know that what I want to have happen, I want it to affect the entirety of the piece. And that was really the cornerstone for being able to get the effect that I wanted with this, was the hard light mode. And that is it for today. I will have prints of this one available since I really need more men in the prints that I have over at my art shop, but I do have a link in the description as well as in the end card that will take you there. And I do want to give a big thank you to anyone who orders from there or even just looks at my art shop. That kind of support really does mean a lot to me. But I do post every Wednesdays and Saturdays, so thank you guys so much for watching today, and I'll see you guys at my next one.